The city had never seen a night so dazzling. The moon hung like a silver crown above the skyline, but even its glow was dim compared to the radiance spilling from the towering glass-domed banquet hall where the most anticipated wedding of the decade was taking place. Tonight, Ethan Maxwell, the billionaire CEO of Maxwell Enterprises, was finally tying the knot. From the moment the invitations were delivered, embossed with gold leaf and sealed with Ethan's family crest, people whispered of nothing else. Politicians, Hollywood elites, tech magnates, and royal dignitaries all cleared their calendars for this one event. Paparazzi camped for days outside the hall, hoping for just one glimpse of the mysterious bride whom Ethan had kept secret from the world. Rumors circulated endlessly. Some claimed she was a European princess. Others whispered she was the daughter of a Middle Eastern oil tycoon. Whoever she was, Ethan had done the impossible. Kept her identity hidden in an age where privacy was almost extinct. Inside the hall, a scene of breathtaking extravagance unfolded. Crystal chandeliers cascaded from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, scattering prisms of light that shimmered across silk-draped walls. Rows of roses, imported fresh that morning from Italy, spilled from ornate golden vases. The scent of jasmine and vanilla candles mixed with the faint sweetness of champagne, bubbling in glass flutes carried by white-gloved waiters. The guests themselves seemed like ornaments. Men in tailored tuxedos, women glittering in gowns worth fortunes. Every conversation buzzed with speculation. Every laugh carried an undertone of curiosity. The orchestra's violins played a soft overture, but even their melody could not silence the anticipation building like a storm. At the altar, Ethan Maxwell stood tall, his presence commanding the room. He was only in his mid-30s, yet the weight of his success and authority aged him beyond his years. His jawline was sharp, his tailored navy suit cut to perfection, and his eyes, usually steely with determination, held an unfamiliar flicker of vulnerability. To the world, Ethan was the embodiment of power, a self-made billionaire whose empire stretched across continents. To his investors, he was a genius strategist. To his rivals, a ruthless competitor. To his employees, a figure both feared and admired. But tonight, he wasn't the CEO. He wasn't the man who had built skyscrapers and bought companies with a flick of his pen. Tonight, he was just a groom, waiting to marry the woman who had captured his guarded heart. Still, even Ethan couldn't escape the whispers. "Do you think she's a politician's daughter?" One guest murmured behind a jeweled fan. "I've heard she's from a royal family in Monaco." Another speculated. No word is she's an heiress from Asia. That's why she hasn't appeared publicly." A third insisted. Ethan heard none of it, or rather, he refused to listen. His gaze was fixed on the towering double doors at the end of the aisle. Beyond them, his bride was preparing to walk into his life fully and permanently. His palms were clammy, a rare crack in the armor of a man who closed billion-dollar deals without blinking. For Ethan, love had been a battlefield more complex than any corporate war. Women had thrown themselves at him for years. Models, socialites, even celebrities. But behind every smile, he had seen the same hunger. Not for him, but for his fortune, his name, his influence. Trust, for Ethan, had become a luxury he couldn't afford. He built walls around his heart, telling himself that companionship was overrated, that marriage was a business deal, nothing more. Until she appeared. He thought about the first time he met her, how unlike the others she had been. No pretenses, no demands, no hunger for wealth. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that disarmed him. When she smiled, it wasn't painted or rehearsed. It was genuine. She saw Ethan not as a billionaire, but simply as a man. Slowly, without meaning to, she had torn down his defenses, piece by piece, until he found himself vulnerable before her. And now, here he stood, at the altar of a wedding that seemed more like a royal coronation. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who distrusted the world now trusted one woman enough to make her his wife. The orchestra swelled. The crowd rose. The massive double doors creaked open, and a collective gasp rippled through the hall. There she was, the bride, draped in a gown of ivory silk, the train so long it took 3 attendants to carry it. She seemed almost ethereal. Diamonds glittered in her veil, catching the chandelier light as though stars had fallen to earth and woven themselves into her dress. She walked slowly, gracefully, each step echoing softly across the marble floor. Her face was hidden beneath the delicate veil, but that only added to the mystery. Guests craned their necks to see, but Ethan saw more than any of them. He saw the woman beneath the veil. Not her wealth, not her beauty, but the quiet strength she carried. His chest tightened with emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. As she drew nearer, Ethan felt a surreal calm wash over him. His doubts, his fears, his constant battles with the world, all melted away in the presence of this one woman. By the time she reached him, his hands no longer trembled with nerves but with anticipation. The priest began the ceremony, his words formal and rehearsed, but Ethan barely registered them. His entire focus was on the moment that was about to come, the unveiling. The lifting of the veil would be more than a tradition. It would be the world's first glimpse of the woman who had managed to win the heart of a man who seemed unshakable. Every camera in the hall clicked. Every breath in the room hitched. Ethan reached out, his fingers brushing the soft fabric of her veil. He hesitated, just for a second, aware that once he lifted it, there would be no going back. The world would know. The mystery would shatter. But then he reminded himself, love was never meant to be hidden. And with that thought, Ethan Maxwell slowly lifted the veil. The next few seconds would alter his life forever. The veil lifted slowly, almost as if the universe itself was delaying the moment. Ethan's hand, steady in boardrooms and battlefields of business, trembled ever so slightly as the fine lace slipped back, revealing the face beneath. And then time seemed to stop. It wasn't the daughter of a royal dynasty. It wasn't the heiress of some billionaire family. It wasn't a celebrity, nor a woman bred in the spotlight. It was Sophia. Gasps tore through the audience like a storm breaking over calm waters. People clutched their pearls, leaned forward in shock, and exchanged frantic whispers. The orchestra faltered, a violin string screeching awkwardly as the musicians tried to recover from their surprise. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing every microsecond of Ethan's reaction. Sophia, his housekeeper, the quiet woman who had lived and worked in the shadows of his mansion for years. Ethan's mind flashed back to countless memories. The way she moved silently through the hallways, cleaning without complaint. The way she'd greet him with a soft "good morning, sir," when he passed her in the kitchen. The way she always seemed to notice when he was troubled, offering him a cup of tea without asking any questions. She had been part of his life for so long, yet invisible to everyone else. And now here she stood, in the center of the world's attention, unveiled as his bride. The whispers in the hall grew louder, biting, cruel.
Impossible.
That's the maid, one woman hissed. A billionaire marrying his servant? What a disgrace, sneered another man, his voice dripping with mockery. This must be some kind of mistake. He was tricked, muttered a guest from the front row. But there was no mistake. Sophia's face, flushed with nerves, stared at the floor. Her brown eyes glistened with unshed tears, not of joy but of dread. She had known this day would come, the moment when her hidden identity would be revealed to a world that judged worth by titles and wealth. She had agreed to marry Ethan because he loved her. Not her status, not her beauty, not her bank account. He loved her. But standing in this sea of judgmental eyes, she feared his love would crumble under pressure. For Sophia, this wedding was never about grandeur. She had dreamed of something small, private. A ceremony in a garden, perhaps, with only a few trusted friends. But Ethan insisted on a public wedding. He wanted the world to see his happiness. He wanted no secrets between them. She had agreed, trusting him, even though her heart trembled with fear of exposure. Now that fear stood before her in flesh and blood. Hundreds of eyes pierced into her, some with curiosity, many with scorn. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he looked at her. For a brief second, his mind betrayed him. What have I done? He thought. His empire, his reputation, the respect he had spent years building, all could collapse in an instant. Every investor, every business partner, every competitor was watching. A CEO's life was not his own. It belonged to the boardrooms, the markets, the headlines. And now, in front of all those watching eyes, his choice defied every rule they lived by. But as quickly as doubt appeared, it was silenced by the sight of Sophia's trembling hands, her lowered gaze, her silent plea for reassurance. He remembered why he chose her. Because unlike everyone else, she never wanted anything from him. She never tried to impress him. She never played games. She had been real, pure, steady. How could he turn away from that now? The priest, awkwardly clearing his throat, tried to continue, but the audience's whispers drowned him out. "Silence, please," he requested. But no one listened. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a scandal unfolding live. "Ethan, this can't be serious." A voice rang out from the front row. It was Mr. Crawford, one of his senior board members. "Think carefully. Your company's future depends on this decision. You can't marry her." His disdainful eyes locked on Sophia as if she were dirt beneath his shoes. Ethan froze. For the first time, he felt the crushing weight of two worlds colliding, the personal and the public. On one side stood Sophia, the woman he loved, fragile yet strong, waiting for his choice. On the other side stood society, wealth, business, reputation, all demanding he discard her. Sophia's breathing quickened. She could feel the humiliation burning into her skin, the laughter hidden behind polished smiles. Her instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear before Ethan's silence became rejection. She imagined the headlines tomorrow. Billionaire exposes maid bride, publicly humiliates her at wedding. The thought alone made her stomach twist. But just as her knees threatened to give way, Ethan moved. He reached out and took her hand firmly, raising it for all to see. "Yes," he said, his voice sharp, clear, cutting through the noise like a blade. "This is Sophia, my housekeeper, and also the woman I love." The hall erupted. Some gasped louder, others chuckled in disbelief. A few clapped nervously, though most simply shook their heads. Sophia's eyes widened, tears spilling at last. She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of doubt. But all she saw was strength. Ethan's declaration was more than a defense. It was a statement, a rebellion against everything expected of him. He was a billionaire, yes, but he was also a man. And as a man, he would not be dictated to by gossip, business, or wealth. The priest hesitated, but then, with a faint smile, continued the vows. The ceremony went on, though the whispers never fully died. Yet through it all, Ethan kept his hand locked around Sophia's, steadying her trembling. And in that moment, despite the chaos, Sophia realized something profound. She was no longer invisible. For years, she had been overlooked, unseen, dismissed as the help. But today, in front of the world, Ethan Maxwell had lifted not just her veil but the shadow she had lived under. He had chosen her openly, without shame. The unveiling that was supposed to humiliate her became a moment of transformation. She was no longer just the housekeeper in Ethan's mansion. She was his wife, his partner, his equal, whether society accepted it or not. What began with shock and scandal ended with something stronger. Love, exposed and unafraid. The moment after Ethan declared Sophia as his bride, the air inside the banquet hall grew heavy with tension. Though his words rang bold and clear, the atmosphere around him thickened with judgment. Whispers rippled like wildfire through the seated crowd, glances darted between one another, and sneers twisted on lips unafraid to pass judgment. Ethan, who had stood unshaken in boardrooms filled with the most cutthroat negotiators, now felt the suffocating weight of countless eyes boring into him. He had expected surprise. What he hadn't expected was this tidal wave of open disdain. His mind began to churn. Years of carefully cultivated reputation threatened to unravel in mere minutes. He thought of the stockholders who would read about this in tomorrow's papers, the clients who would question his judgment, the rival CEOs who would mock his decision. A billionaire CEO was expected to marry strategically. An heiress, a socialite, someone who brought power and prestige. His choice of Sophia, his housekeeper, was not just unexpected. It was unforgivable to those who valued appearances above love. And yet, when he turned his gaze to Sophia, everything else blurred. She stood silently beside him, her hand trembling slightly in his, her eyes fixed downward, afraid to meet the stares piercing her. Ethan's chest tightened. She wasn't used to this. For years, she had moved through life unnoticed, invisible to the grand world of wealth and power. And now, in one cruel instant, she was thrust into its harshest spotlight. Her cheeks burned under the scrutiny, but she didn't let go of his hand. It was that small act, her refusal to let go, that steadied him. Still, doubts gnawed at him. What if they're right? He thought bitterly. What if this destroys everything I've built? His company wasn't just a business. It was his life's work, his identity. Could he really risk it all for love? Could he let billions, legacies, and entire industries tremble because of one decision of the heart? His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp voice from the front row. "Ethan," came the commanding tone of Mr. Crawford, the senior board member whose approval often swayed entire decisions within Maxwell Enterprises. "Think carefully, son. This is not about love. This is about your name, your company, your shareholders. If you go through with this a mistake, you'll ruin everything." The hall fell even quieter. Crawford's words carried weight. He was not just an investor. He was family to many in the room, a patriarch of the wealthy elite. His disapproval was a dagger, and many guests nodded in agreement. Sophia's grip tightened around Ethan's hand, as if silently asking him to remember why he had brought her here. But she also braced herself for the inevitable. Part of her expected him to falter, to bow under the crushing pressure. How could he not? The life he had built towered above them both, and she feared that love, her love, wasn't strong enough to stand against it. Ethan's mind flooded with memories. He remembered the first time he noticed Sophia, really noticed her. It was after a long day of brutal negotiations, when he came home to find her quietly humming as she cleaned the library. He had paused at the doorway, captivated not by her beauty, though she was beautiful, but by her peace. She radiated calm, something he hadn't felt in years. She had looked up, smiled at him, and asked softly, "Long day, sir?" Not for once trying to impress, not asking for favors, not seeking wealth. Just acknowledging his humanity. That moment stayed with him, and so did the many after it. The evenings when she would leave him a simple meal because she knew he'd skip dinner, the time she scolded him gently for working too late, the rare laughs they shared when she teased him about his inability to cook even toast. These memories clashed violently with the cold, disapproving stares of the crowd. His board saw Sophia as a liability. Society saw her as a scandal. But Ethan saw her as the one person who made him feel like more than a title, more than a billionaire. The priest cleared his throat nervously. "Shall we proceed?" he asked, uncertain if the ceremony was collapsing before his eyes. All eyes turned to Ethan. This was the dilemma of his lifetime: to follow his heart or to yield to the crushing weight of expectation. He imagined both paths. If he walked away from Sophia now, the guests would sigh with relief, the board would applaud his rationality, and the newspapers would praise him for avoiding embarrassment. His empire would remain intact, but he would spend the rest of his life empty. Every boardroom victory would feel hollow. Every smile from a suitable bride would remind him of the woman he had abandoned at the altar. He would preserve his reputation but lose his soul. If he chose Sophia, he would ignite outrage. Investors might pull out. Newspapers would mock him. Society would label him a fool. His empire might tremble under the scandal. But when he looked into Sophia's eyes, he knew he would still have the one thing no money could ever buy: love that was true, unshaken, unbought. The dilemma tightened around him like a noose. Sweat trickled down his back beneath the perfectly tailored suit. He could hear his own heartbeat louder than the murmurs in the hall. Then Sophia's hand shifted in his. She wasn't pulling away. She was holding tighter, anchoring him. Slowly, cautiously, she looked up into his eyes. For a fleeting moment, he saw her fear, her pain, her shame. But deeper than that, he saw her trust. She was silently telling him, "If you let me go, I will understand." But if you hold on, I will never leave your side. And that was when Ethan realized the truth. This wasn't about business. It wasn't about wealth. It wasn't even about reputation. It was about the kind of man he wanted to be. Did he want to be a puppet, controlled by money and expectations, living a hollow life built on other people's approval? Or did he want to be free to love who he wanted, free to stand by his own choices, free to live not for headlines but for his own heart? The choice crystallized in that instant. Ethan straightened his back, his eyes sharp as steel once more, but not with the coldness of a businessman. This time, it was the clarity of a man who had made a decision that no amount of money could sway. He turned to the guests, to Crawford, to every sneering face in the hall, and spoke with a voice that carried power. Yes, she is my housekeeper. Yes, she is not what you expected. But she is the woman I love. And that is the only truth that matters tonight. Gasps, scoffs, some even laughed bitterly. But Ethan did not waver. His words silenced Sophia's doubts, her eyes filling with tears, not of shame, but of overwhelming relief. The dilemma was resolved. Ethan chose love, and in that choice, though he risked his empire, he found something greater, his freedom. The silence after Ethan's words stretched like eternity. The grand hall, once filled with polite applause and excited chatter, was now thick with disbelief. His declaration, "Yes, she is my housekeeper, but more importantly, she is the woman I love," hung in the air like a defiant flame against the cold winds of disapproval. For a moment no one moved, no one breathed. Then the hall erupted. Murmurs swelled into voices, voices into shouts, shouts into a storm of divided opinion. The orchestra fell silent, bows dropping from trembling hands as musicians watched history unfold. Some guests gasped in shock. Others sneered openly, unable to mask their disdain. Laughter bubbled from a corner, cruel and mocking, while a few bold souls clapped awkwardly, their hands hesitant but sincere. Ethan stood tall, his hand clasped firmly around Sophia's. His eyes, usually icy and detached in business, now blazed with something raw and human. Conviction. This wasn't the Ethan Maxwell the world knew. The Ethan who had once been defined by corporate ruthlessness was gone. Here stood a man who had chosen love over empire, heart over reputation. Crawford rose again, his face red with fury. "Ethan, enough of this nonsense," he barked. "Do you realize what you're doing? This spectacle will ruin you. The board will not stand for it. Your investors will flee. You're gambling your fortune on a maid." His words sliced through the air like a whip. Gasps followed. A few nodded in agreement, their faces twisted with contempt. But Ethan's voice thundered back, unwavering. "No, Mr. Crawford, I am not gambling. I am choosing. For once in my life, I am choosing not for money, not for appearances, not for business, but for myself. For my heart." His words sent a tremor through the hall. Some scoffed louder, dismissing him as reckless. But others, especially the younger guests, exchanged glances of awe. It was rare, almost unheard of, for a billionaire to defy the iron chains of social expectation so publicly. Beside him, Sophia's tears spilled freely, but they were not tears of shame. They were tears of release, of being seen. For so long, she had feared she would always remain in the shadows, hidden, a secret to protect his reputation. But now, in front of the world, Ethan had spoken her truth out loud. She mattered. She was worthy. She was loved. Sophia dared to lift her eyes to the crowd. Where once she had seen only disdain, she now noticed subtle shifts. Some expressions softened. A woman in the second row, dressed in emerald silk, wiped her eyes discreetly. A young man near the aisle whispered to his date, "That's brave." Not everyone approved, but not everyone condemned. For the first time, she realized that their love story might inspire, not just scandalize. The priest, caught between tradition and chaos, hesitated. "Shall we continue?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "Yes," Ethan replied firmly, never taking his eyes off Sophia. "We shall continue. Nothing has changed." But in truth, everything had changed. The priest resumed, his voice steadying as he recited the vows. Ethan spoke his part with unwavering certainty. Every word he uttered sounded less like ritual and more like promise, etched deep into the air. I take you, Sophia, not because of what the world sees, but because of who you are when no one is watching. I promise to honor you, to protect you, and to stand beside you, no matter what storms may come. Gasps turned to murmurs again. Some rolled their eyes, but others listened, moved despite themselves. When it was Sophia's turn, her voice trembled at first, soft as a whisper. I take you, Ethan, not for your wealth, not for your name, but for the man you are when you close the door to the world. The man who laughed when I teased him about burning toast. The man who listened to my stories when no one else cared. The man who showed me that even the mighty can be kind. Her words grew stronger as she went on, carried by the strength Ethan had given her. I promise to walk with you, not behind you, not beneath you, but beside you, in light and in shadow, in triumph and in failure. The room hushed. Even the harshest critics felt the sincerity in her voice. There was no performance here, no hunger for status. Only love, pure, unpolished, undeniable. Then came the moment. You may kiss the bride, the priest declared. Ethan pulled Sophia gently into his arms. He kissed her not as a billionaire proving a point, but as a man sealing a vow. The hall erupted once more, not with cheers, but with a cacophony of divided reactions. Some applauded genuinely, some clapped mockingly, others shook their heads in disbelief, but Ethan and Sophia heard none of it. For them, the kiss drowned out the noise, a world within a world where only love existed. As they turned to face the guests as husband and wife, Ethan tightened his hold on Sophia. His voice, calm yet unyielding, carried across the hall once more. Judge us if you will, doubt me if you must, but know this, I would rather be a poor man with her than a rich man without her. That line struck like lightning. It was quoted by journalists the very next morning, printed across newspapers, spread across social media. Some mocked it as foolish idealism. Others called it the most romantic declaration of the century. In that moment, Ethan knew he had crossed a line of no return. Society would not forgive easily. Investors would call him reckless. Tabloids would tear Sophia apart. But he no longer cared. He had chosen his path. And Sophia, though overwhelmed, felt something shift deep within her. She was no longer the silent maid in the background. She was his wife, his partner, his equal, not because the world approved, but because Ethan had declared it so. Together, they stepped forward, hand in hand, into a future uncertain but undeniably theirs. The bold declaration had been made. The world could roar in protest, but their love had spoken louder. The morning after the wedding, the world woke to headlines that spread like wildfire. Newspapers, online tabloids, television talk shows, all carried the same story, each with its own spin, each more sensational than the last. Billionaire marries maid. Fairy tale or folly? Ethan Maxwell shocks high society. CEO chooses housekeeper over heiress. Maxwell Enterprises in crisis after scandalous wedding. Some magazines mocked Ethan as a man blinded by foolish romance. Others attacked Sophia directly, painting her as a schemer who must have tricked him. Photographs of her, taken without mercy during the ceremony, were plastered across glossy pages, scrutinized and ridiculed. Look at her dress, one gossip column sneered. She doesn't even look like she belongs in couture. She's just a maid. Another wrote, how long before she cashes in and disappears with half his fortune? The cruelty was endless. At Maxwell Enterprises, chaos erupted. The boardroom, once a place of controlled strategy, was now a battlefield of panic. Senior executives pounded fists on the table, voices raised in outrage. This is unacceptable, one barked. Our stock has already dropped 2 points this morning, another said, waving a report angrily. Clients are calling, questioning our credibility, a third added. At the head of the table, Ethan sat calmly, listening. His expression gave nothing away, though inside, his patience was thinning. "Ethan," Mr. Crawford said, his voice cold and deliberate, "this marriage of yours is a liability. Investors are losing faith. The media is tearing us apart. You need to take control of this narrative. Annul it. End it now before the damage is irreparable." All eyes turned to Ethan. Silence fell, heavy with expectation. But he did not flinch. Instead, he leaned forward, his gaze sharp as steel. "Gentlemen," he said evenly, "I built this empire. Not the tabloids, not the gossip, not your fears. Me. And I will not destroy my marriage to appease your prejudice." Gasps of outrage filled the room. A few muttered, "He's lost his mind." But Ethan's voice grew harder, slicing through their protests. "You call Sophia a liability. I call her my strength. You measure value by wealth and power. I measure it by loyalty and truth. If our clients cannot respect that, then they were never truly ours to begin with." The room fell silent again, though discontent lingered in the air. Outside the boardroom, Sophia faced her own trials. Wherever she went, cameras followed. Paparazzi swarmed the gates of their mansion, shouting cruel questions. "Sophia, did you seduce him for money? How does it feel to be a billionaire's maid-turned-wife? Do you even know how to handle high society?" She never responded. She never shouted back. Instead, she walked with quiet dignity, her chin slightly raised, her steps steady. But inside, the words cut deep. One afternoon, Ethan found her in the garden, her hands shaking as she tried to tend the roses. He gently took the shears from her trembling fingers. "Talk to me," he urged softly. Tears welled in her eyes. "They hate me, Ethan. They think I don't belong. And maybe they're right." Her voice cracked, her insecurities laid bare. "I'm not like them. I don't know which fork to use at their dinners. I don't wear diamonds or designer dresses. I'm just me. And maybe that's not enough." Ethan cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me. You are more than enough. You are the reason I'm still human in a world that wants to turn me into a machine. Don't let them define you. You define you." Those words stayed with her. Instead of retreating, Sophia began to face the world with quiet strength. She attended charity events by Ethan's side, wearing simple gowns, never flashy, never trying to outshine anyone. She smiled warmly at people who expected arrogance. She spoke gently, listened intently, and carried herself with grace that no designer label could buy. Slowly, perceptions began to shift. The same journalists who once mocked her now wrote reluctantly respectful pieces. "There is something disarmingly genuine about Mrs. Maxwell," one columnist admitted. "She doesn't try to play the part of a socialite. She simply is herself." But the backlash didn't disappear overnight. One evening, during a gala, a wealthy socialite confronted her openly. "Tell me, Mrs. Maxwell," she said with a venomous smile, "how does one go from scrubbing floors to sipping champagne with billionaires?" The crowd laughed cruelly. Sophia felt her cheeks burn, her throat tighten. But before she could respond, Ethan's voice boomed across the hall. "She didn't climb to this place," he declared, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I lowered my walls to meet her where she stood, and it is the best decision I've ever made." The hall fell silent. Some smiled, others scoffed, but once again, Ethan had drawn the line. Meanwhile, Maxwell Enterprises, contrary to the board's fears, did not collapse. In fact, a surprising shift occurred. New clients approached, impressed not by his wealth but by his integrity. "If he can stand by love against the world," one businessman said, "then he can stand by his partners." Ethan's boldness became his strength. His empire wavered but did not fall. Through all of it, Sophia never changed. She still rose early, often making breakfast for Ethan herself despite the staff. She still walked through the gardens with her hands brushing the flowers. She still treated everyone, from the chauffeur to the CEO, with kindness. She didn't wear her new title as armor. She wore it lightly, as though it had never been about status in the first place. And that was what won people over. Her resilience in the face of cruelty, her humility despite her new life, her quiet strength in standing beside Ethan. All of it spoke louder than diamonds or status ever could. The world had tried to break her. Instead, she had shown them that dignity was not in titles but in character. And Ethan, watching her each day, knew that his choice, though costly, was the only one worth making. Together, they turned backlash into a lesson. A lesson that power is not in wealth, but in love that refuses to bow, refuses to break. The storm eventually passed. Like all storms, it roared with violence, broke branches, and tried to uproot the fragile seedlings of their union. But when the skies finally cleared, what remained standing was stronger, deeper, and more rooted than before. Months after the wedding, Ethan and Sophia found themselves walking together through the very same garden where fate had first woven their lives together. The roses, freshly bloomed, swayed gently in the wind, as though bowing in acknowledgement of their journey. Sophia bent to touch one of the blossoms, her fingers brushing its petals. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly, though her tone was more curious than fearful. Ethan stopped and turned to her, his brow furrowed. "Regret what?" "Choosing me," she whispered, "defying the world, risking everything." A quiet smile spread across Ethan's face, tender yet unyielding. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Sophia, the only regret I could ever have is not finding you sooner." Her eyes shimmered with tears, not of sadness, but of the indescribable gratitude that comes when love proves itself again and again. A new kind of partnership. Their marriage was not the fairy tale most people imagined. There were no endless parties, no gaudy displays of luxury meant to silence critics. Instead, their love lived in the quiet spaces of everyday life. Sophia still woke early, preparing breakfast even when the mansion's chef protested. Ethan often joined her in the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up, insisting on making pancakes even though he nearly always burned them. They laughed at the small failures, finding joy not in perfection but in imperfection shared. They took long walks in the evenings, often hand in hand, away from flashing cameras and gossip. Sometimes they spoke of business or family, but most often, they simply enjoyed silence. The kind of silence only two souls who understood one another completely could share. Ethan no longer carried the weight of loneliness that had once pressed heavily on his heart. And Sophia, though she still sometimes battled the shadow of doubt, began to believe more firmly that love had chosen her. Not luck, not circumstance, but love itself. Together, they began reshaping what marriage meant in their world. It was no longer about matching fortunes or social status, but about building something lasting, grounded in truth. Society learns a lesson. Over time, society's hostility softened. The same people who once mocked Sophia's presence now found themselves unable to ignore her quiet impact. She launched small charitable projects, supporting housekeepers, cleaners, and workers often overlooked by society. "Dignity," she said in an interview, "belongs to everyone. No work is beneath anyone." Her words struck a chord. Thousands of women wrote letters, thanking her for giving voice to those who worked in silence. What was once considered a scandal now began to feel like a revolution. Business leaders who had dismissed Ethan at first slowly returned, realizing that his decisions, while unconventional, were rooted in principle. And in the end, even the boardroom could not argue with results. Maxwell Enterprises thrived, stronger than before, proving that integrity could exist at the highest levels of power. Business leaders who had dismissed Ethan at first slowly returned, realizing that his decisions, while unconventional, were rooted in principle. And in the end, even the boardroom could not argue with results. Maxwell Enterprises thrived, stronger than before, proving that integrity could exist at the highest levels of power. Sophia became more than just Ethan's wife. She became a symbol, not of wealth, not of scandal, but of resilience. She had entered their world with nothing but her truth, and in the end, it was truth that endured. Love in its purest form. One evening, on their anniversary, Ethan surprised Sophia with a small ceremony in the garden. Only a few close friends attended, no cameras, no tabloids, no noise. This time, there was no veil to lift, no audience to judge. Just two souls standing where their story began. "I wanted to do this," Ethan said, taking her hands. "Because the first time, I didn't get to say everything I wanted, so let me say it now." His voice, usually strong and commanding, softened as he continued. "I've built empires, Sophia, but none of them mean anything compared to the home I've built with you. You are not my maid. You are not my scandal. You are not my mistake. You are my miracle." Tears streamed down Sophia's cheeks as he slid a simple gold band onto her finger. Not encrusted with diamonds, not a flashy statement piece, just a circle of gold, endless and unbroken. When it was her turn, Sophia's voice trembled, but her words carried more power than any vow written in poetry. "I never imagined this life, Ethan. I never thought I belonged in your world. But what I've learned is that love doesn't ask if you belong. It makes you belong. You've shown me that I am enough. And I promise, for as long as I breathe, to remind you that you are loved not for your wealth, but for your heart." They kissed, sealing their vows, and in that moment, no headline, no judgment, no prejudice could touch them. Beyond wealth, beyond judgment. Years passed, and their love endured the way all true loves do. Not through grand gestures alone, but through the quiet commitment of daily choice. Ethan chose her every morning, and Sophia chose him every night. When children came into their lives, they raised them with the same values that had carried them through hardship: humility, kindness, strength, and truth. They taught their children not to measure worth by status but by compassion. The world still whispered. There were still those who called her the maid who married a billionaire. But Sophia no longer cared, because in Ethan's eyes, in their children's laughter, in the life they built together, she had found her forever home. And Ethan? He never stopped reminding her, through words and through actions, that his choice had been the greatest one of his life. The final lesson. Their story became more than just gossip, more than just entertainment for society. It became a lesson etched in the hearts of many. A lesson that love, when true, can withstand ridicule. That strength is not in bending to society's will, but in standing firm with the one who makes your soul whole. In the end, they proved that the veil, the one society placed between classes, wealth, and worth, was only an illusion. When lifted, it revealed not scandal, not shame, but the purest form of love. A love beyond wealth, a love beyond status, a love beyond the veil.